Hi, today under social history of England, we are going to see Agrarian Revolution. The term Agrarian Revolution implies the great changes that happened in the agricultural methods of England. The period runs between 1700 to 1850 during the reign of George II and then George III. The pioneers of agrarian revolution are Jethro Tull of Berkshire, Charles Townshend of Norfolk, Thomas Coke of Holkham, Robert Bakewell of Leicestershire. The key writer who promotes the revolution is Arthur Young. There are many notable inventions during this period. They are seed drill, the Rotherhamplow, threshing machine, reaping machine, all iron plow machine and steam power. Let's see one by one. Let's first see what are the causes of the agrarian revolution. Before the revolution, the open field system was followed. This old open field system was a failure because it wastes land and time. According to this arrangement, every year one of the three fields was to be out of cultivation. Secondly, the farmer's lands are very scattered, so he had to walk considerable distances to reach the remote places. And moreover, there were no hedges and it leads to the animals trampling crops and spread disease. There was no proper drainage too. In the 18th century, population was increasing, so more food was needed to balance the food supply. But the yield could not be enlarged under the old system of cultivation. And moreover, urban dwellers' number was increasing. So they depended on the farmers for their food. The farmers were in a condition to produce more and more goods. This scarcity of food materials resulted in the rise of prices. So corn prices were increased due to corn were supplied to Britain from Europe during the Napoleonic Wars. The old-fashioned farmers thought to produce more to earn more money, so they shifted to new practices. This idea was an incentive for them to improve their agricultural methods. The reallocation of land. This is the system which was adapted in opposition to the old open field system. In the reallocation of land system, a number of enclosure acts were passed. These enclosure acts were the essential things to abolish the open field system of agriculture. Many acts were passed for the reallocation of scattered strips of land into a large new fields that were enclosed either by hedges or walls or fences. Before this enclosure system, In the old open field system, there was a common land. It was under the control of manors. Those manorial lords followed two practices. Therefore, it contains two elements, namely the peasant tenantry and the lord's holding. The tenant farmer had to pay rent in the name of cash or labor or produce. He had to work in the farm. He can get the rights to pasture, that is for grazing, pannage for feeding the livestock on fallen fruits, or estuaries. The farmer can get the allowance of the food, the wood for fuel. So this was the open field system which was practiced in the past. The tenants had to pay rent, whereas the lord, the manorial lord, can have the whole rights to use that land. The ownership of the common land and the wasteland was taken from them in the Enclosure Acts. New fields were designed, new roads were laid down, and the land was reallocated to different farmers and lords. When an Enclosure Act was passed, a commissioner was appointed to visit the village concerned or allotted to him, and he carried out the work of reallocation of the land. But the poor patients were not satisfied with the reallocation because they sold away their small holdings to wealthy businessmen of the city. So, they are in a condition to leave the village and move to the city. Finally, the class or rural inhabitants known as yeomen disappeared from the scene. Anyway, there are some major advantages in the enclosure system. The effective crop rotation system followed in enclosure system resulted in maintaining or sustaining the fertility of the land. Secondly, it saves time of the farmers in traveling between dispersed fields. Thirdly, it ends the constant quarrels over boundaries as they have as the boundaries were drafted. In the picture we could see how the strips of land owned by one farmer had been scattered around the area. But after enclosure, the farmer's land is all together and fenced. Roads were also laid down. Let's see Jethro Tull's drill for sowing seeds. One of the advantages of the enclosure system was it gave scope for many enterprising people to make experiments. Such person is Jethro Tull of Berkshire. He was one such person who made some pioneering work in the field of agricultural improvement. He was the inventor of the drill for sowing seeds. You can see it in the picture. He emphasized the necessity of careful selection of seeds to grow good crops. Next we have Charles Townshend. He belongs to Norfolk. He is the brother-in-law of Walpole. He adopted Tull's principles in working his estate at Rotherham. So he paid much attention to the question of rotation of crops. He introduced Norfolk the four-course rotation of turnips, barley, cloves and ryegrass. And wheat was also cultivated in the first year. His innovations made Norfolk a leading agricultural country. With this result, in the 30 years, the rental of one farm rose from £180 to £800 a year. And thirdly, we have Thomas Coke. He belongs to Holkham in Norfolk. He has introduced bone as best manure for the land. He followed precepts of Tull, and in addition he fed the soil with the manures including bones. In 9 years of time he was able to grow excellent wheat crops, and by means of cloves and other fruits was able to make his land carry 3 times as many sheep and cattle as it had ever done before. He also introduced new artificial foods such as oil cake and led the way in fattening cattle for the London markets. He held yearly meeting of farmers at his house, and at these meetings farming topics were discussed and much advice was given and received. He changed the entire appearance of the countryside by planting trees upon his land. It is estimated that the annual rental of his estate rose from £2,200 to £20,000 in 10 years. And next we have Robert Bakewell. He is a Leicestershire farmer. He was known for his revolution in the methods of stock breeding. Bakewell was the first to turn his attention to the production of meat as the main consideration of stock breeders, than valuing the cattle for its wool. So meat was introduced, and for the production of meat, cattle breeding was enhanced. He succeeded in producing a new breed of sheep which fattened quickly and weighed heavy. And farmers from far and wide visited his farm at Disley and became converts to his new methods. Others who did pioneering work in this field were George Cully, Charles Collin, and John Ellman. Royal patronage was given to the movement of revolutionizing the agricultural methods. George III established a model farm at Windsor based on the new revolutionary methods, and he is affectionately called by his subjects as Farmer George, the most famous of whom Arthur Young. He wrote in his writings about the agricultural warriors. When a board of agriculture was established in 1793, Young was made its secretary. He made a vigorous crusade in favor of enclosures, large farms and longer leases, and made the new methods more widely known by his writings. And finally, let's conclude by analyzing its advantages and disadvantages. Let's first see the advantages of the agricultural methods and the agrarian revolution. English banking system grew with the advent of the enclosure system. Wealthy landlords borrowed money from the banks to do fencing and to effect other improvements. So they had to borrow money from the banks because of the enclosure system. Many small independent farmers had to sell their lands. And middle class people purchased their land to make more profits through farming. And enclosure system improved the transport too. It was made easy to transport agricultural products from one place to another, especially from towns to cities. And this measure was very desirable from the point of view of national production. However, it had a harmful effect on the poor peasant, when they need to sell their lands. In accordance with the system, even the commons were enclosed. But the system deprived a common farmer of his privilege to graze the cattle and cut the fuel from the commons. This made the villages depopulated, and the farmers became paid laborers and moved to city. And once again, it added them to army of paupers and unemployed.